Over the past 6 years, the Chicago Bulls have been one of the most disappointing teams in the NBA. One playoff appearance that concluded in a first-round exit, only one season with a winning record, and with the amount of changes to the roster, coaching staff, and front office, it felt like Chicago had no sense of direction, and the amount of losing was going to be extended by an unbearable amount. And what would have made that drought even more miserable is if they lost Zach LaVine within that time frame. As Zach LaVine, who dealt with an ACL injury back in 2017, has quickly turned his career around and manifested himself into one of the most impressive volume scorers in the NBA. However, with this season being the last year of his contract, and again Chicago not having any clear direction on how to get themselves out of this hole, watching LaVine depart from the Bulls would have been devastating. So, what did Chicago do? Well, they made a lot of changes. And with a new regime in the front office, not only has Chicago turned around their success so much so that they're in the playoffs, but as I record this video, they find themselves at the top of the Eastern Conference. And what makes this turnaround so impressive is that not only have they done it within a year's amount of time, but they have surrounded Zach LaVine with pieces that a lot of people have either forgotten about or gave up on. So how are they able to do this? But before we get into today's video, let me give a huge shout out to today's sponsors, and they are Keeps. Keeps is a subscription service that focuses on making it easier and more affordable for men to treat their male pattern baldness. 2 out of 3 men will experience some form of baldness before the age of 35, and when you get to that point, you want to have a clinically proven and research-backed product, not only for hair loss, but also improvement in hair growth, and that's exactly what Keeps provides. What makes it even better is that Keeps is convenient and affordable. You get the same quality and expert care that you will receive from a doctor's office or a pharmacy, but right at home, and after you receive your doctor-recommended treatment plan, it gets delivered straight to your door at half the cost of a traditional pharmacy. Also, Keeps has an amazing line of experts that will make sure they will select the right product for you, and that goes from everything from preventing hair loss, stimulating hair growth, or just even taking better care of the hair that you already have on your head. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off on your first order, go to keeps.com/legend or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/legend for 50% off on your first order. And again, huge thank you for Keeps for sponsoring this portion of the video. The rapid rebuild begins at last year's trade deadline, when the Chicago Bulls decided to participate in a transaction with the Orlando Magic for 6'10" big man Nikola Vucevic. Now at the time, what I thought Chicago gave up for Vucevic was pretty hefty. Not only did the Bulls move 21-year-old big man Wendell Carter Jr., who just a few years prior was the 7th overall pick in the 2018 draft, but they also moved off of not 1 but 2 first-rounders. However, even though Chicago had to go pretty deep in their bag of assets, what they were getting in return was a quality big man that seemed to be a really good pairing alongside Zach LaVine. As Big Vooch, who started his career in Philadelphia, really blossomed within his time in Orlando into a quality big man. In the couple of years leading up to this transaction, Vucevic is one of the very few players in the NBA who can claim that he has consistently averaged 20 and 10. And to be more specific, when Vucevic was traded, he was in the middle of a season where he was averaging 24.5 points, 12 rebounds, 4 assists, and more impressively, shooting 48% from the field and 40% from deep on high volume. That level of efficiency and the various ways to put the ball in the basket isn't seen in too many big men in today's game. So when presented the opportunity, it makes sense that an organization like Chicago showed a lot of interest, even if it meant that they were going to have to give up a lot of draft capital and a young player in the process. And quite frankly, I can't blame them. Vucevic was in the middle of a season where he was averaging 25 and 10 on great efficiency. That level of production is only being seen in big men such as Embiid, Jokic, Davis, and Giannis. All players who immediately get the label of some of the best the NBA has to offer, yet for whatever reason Vucevic's name isn't brought up in that conversation. Chicago made a massive addition with Vucevic to pair alongside Zach LaVine, and even though there weren't too many people talking about the transaction, the potential of a duo featuring LaVine and Vucevic was pretty undeniable. Unfortunately, for the remainder of the 2021 season, we weren't able to see too much of the duo as Zach LaVine missed several games entering health and safety protocols, but it definitely was the first step in the right direction. Now fast forward to the 2021 offseason, and this is where things really start to heat up. The next addition to the Chicago Bulls roster was Ayo Dosunmu, a 6'5" shooting guard out of Illinois that somehow fell to the second round. Now there isn't any clear indication to why Ayo was still available that late, Going back and looking at several experts' predictions on where exactly Dosunmu was going to be selected, many people did not believe that he was going to fall any further than the 22nd overall pick, which belonged to the Los Angeles Lakers. And to cement this belief even further, the young prospect worked out with several teams, everyone from the Indiana Pacers to the Washington Wizards, and yes, even the Los Angeles Lakers. However, Chicago was lucky, as the Bulls not only clearly received the biggest steal in the draft, but also one can easily argue that Ayo's ceiling at this point is just as high as many players who were selected with a top 10 pick. With his 6'10 wingspan and his contagious will to play defense, Ayo has had an immediate impact as a point of attack defender, and as time has progressed with him improving, as well as key pieces missing time due to injuries in Lonzo Ball, Caruso, and Zach LaVine, Dosunmu has not only received the opportunity of quality minutes, but also recently has been promoted to a starter. Within the last 20 games, the 22-year-old is averaging 11 points, 6.5 assists, a steal, 4 rebounds on shooting splits of 52, 40, and 83. But what makes it even more impressive is that while he's averaging 7 assists, he's only turning the ball over twice a game. And even if those numbers don't jump off the page for you, which is fair enough, just watching his game, it makes it very clear that his ceiling seems way higher than many people originally thought. But wait, there's even more additions. Just a few weeks after the draft, the Chicago Bulls decided to fortify their backcourt even more by adding Lonzo Ball to their roster. Drafted by the Los Angeles Lakers back in 2017 and was pegged to be the next great point guard, unfortunately Lonzo fell miserably short of that mark in his first 2 years in the NBA. Granted, he had a great feel as a passer, however there was a clear cap on his ability to play make due to the lack of scoring prowess that he was constantly displaying, and really and truly couldn't create his own shot off the dribble due to his wonky shot form. The Lakers decided to pull the plug on the Lonzo project and ship them off to New Orleans in the Anthony Davis trade, and as soon as Lonzo touched down in New Orleans, we saw immediate improvement. Defensively, he was able to continue to add on what he was already able to do within his first 2 years in the league, but more importantly, Lonzo went from an abysmal low 30% shooter from behind the arc to a very impressive 37.5% shooter from deep. The 22-year-old carried that production into the next season, validating his production even further, and honestly making it a no-brainer for the Pelicans to sign him to a long-term deal so they can build something special between Lonzo, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. New Orleans decided to go in a different direction because they felt like the amount of money that Lonzo was going to receive in the open market was going to be a bit too pricey for them, and instead decided to replace Lonzo with Devontae Graham, who came at a price tag that was definitely more team friendly. And honestly, it was a massive mistake. Not only did New Orleans receive little to nothing for Lonzo in a sign and trade to the Bulls, but now Ball has improved even more with his three-point shooting, as he is now shooting north of 40% from deep, and defensively Lonzo has ramped it up a whole nother level. Before he dealt with his knee injury, there was a legitimate conversation to be had for Lonzo making an all-defensive team, as he was a much more aggressive point of attack defender. He came across as a bit more savvier in the passing lanes, and the willingness to switch on bigger players and help out some of his teammates defensively made his defensive effort contagious amongst other players. Then, after the Lonzo Ball signing trade, the Chicago Bulls decided to sign 6'4" guard Alex Caruso. Caruso was an undrafted prospect who entered the NBA on a $50,000 contract from the Oklahoma City Thunder, but made a name for himself with the Los Angeles Lakers as a pesky defender. Once Caruso made a name for himself and signed a 2-year, $5.5 million contract back in the summer of 2019, he quickly became a more prominent figure in the Lakers rotation during the 2020 championship run and continued to improve on his game, so much so that one could easily argue that he overachieved the contract that he signed. So once last year's offseason arose, you would assume that the Lakers would have been ecstatic on signing a homegrown, hard-working point of attack defender to a roster that would have desperately needed it, but they didn't. With no offer on the table from the Lakers, Caruso decided to go out in the free market and see what he could get from another organization. And there was Chicago waiting on him with a 4-year, $37 million contract. So with Caruso feeling defeated, he happily took the offer from Chicago and is now playing for the Bulls, and this year he continues to grow, especially as a defender. Similar to Lonzo before he dealt with injuries, Caruso had a very legitimate argument as an all-defensive team player, as he too was not only scrappy and aggressive as a point-of-attack defender, but the level of willingness and IQ that both he and Lonzo provided to this team defensively aided the Chicago Bulls to overachieve on that side of the floor, so much so that when both of them were healthy, Chicago was a top 10 defensive unit in the NBA. And then there was the biggest acquisition of them all, Demar Derozan. DeRozan is a 6'6" shooting guard who started his career with the Toronto Raptors, and even though the grind for DeRozan becoming a star caliber player in the NBA was rather slow, once he reached his peak, he was dubbed the face of the franchise for the Raptors. The mid-range assassin was not only heavily decorated, but also led Toronto to some of the most success the franchise had ever seen. Now, unfortunately, there were a lot of playoff blunders in DeRozan's career in Toronto, and then once the front office thought it would be best suited if they departed and traded DeMar to San Antonio for Kawhi Leonard, and then the Raptors went on to win a championship, I truly believe the idea of who DeRozan was as a player in the NBA community was heavily soiled. To make matters worse, a level of success and accomplishments DeRozan saw out west trickled down immensely, and quickly a player who was viewed as the face of a franchise turned out to be an afterthought amongst many basketball fans. So when the Bulls acquired DeMar Derozan during the offseason, it wasn't met with the level of optimism that you would believe many people would have when a franchise is acquiring a star caliber player. Matter of fact, there are many people who doubted the idea of pairing DeMar Derozan and Zach LaVine alongside one another. Many media outlets believed that DeRozan was barely a top 50 player in the NBA, and oh yeah, there was that one guy who wrote this article. And because of that level of doubt that surrounded the acquisition at the beginning of the season, I am happy to say that DeMar Derozan is having easily the best season of his career. He's having a career high in points, still able to get to the free throw line rather frequently, which is very impressive for someone his age. But more importantly, one of the knocks on DeRozan's game is his efficiency, especially because he's not a volume three-point shooter. However, this year he has consistently proved people wrong that you don't have to rely on three-point shots. You can kill people from the mid-range area, and he's been doing it at a historic rate. As I record this video, DeRozan is clearly the highest volume mid-range scorer in the NBA, attempting 9 of them a game, but what's more impressive is how accurate he is in that area, essentially shooting 50% in the mid-range area, and the only player who comes close to that level of volume and accuracy is Kevin Durant. And what's even more impressive is this active stretch that DeRozan is going through right now. Again, as I'm recording this video, DeRozan is in the middle of a 10-game stretch where he scored at least 30 points or more in every single outing. And within these stretch of games, DeRozan is averaging nearly 37 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists on shooting splits of 56, 42, 87. Win it or not, DeRozan is clearly having an MVP caliber season this year, and thanks to his contributions, especially as of late, it doesn't even matter if Caruso, Lonzo, or even Zach LaVine are missing games. His ability to still keep Chicago competitive not only is valuable to the organization, but also speaks to how valuable of a player he has been all season long. And honestly, the career arc of DeRozan is the reason why I wanted to make this video. The Chicago Bulls as an organization, they were lost, no sense of direction, and depending on who you talk to, many people would argue they were the laughingstock of the NBA. And instead of just blowing it up, trading Zach LaVine, and heavily depending on the draft, they decided to go the other direction. Scout correctly, make the right decisions, and add pieces to their roster that the rest of the NBA have either forgotten about or gave up on. And to make it even more impressive, they did all of that within a year's time. So shout out to the Chicago Bulls and their fan base. Not only is this a roster that can compete in this year's playoff run, but also moving forward, they have an endless amount of talent that should last them for the next 5 to 7 years. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Please let me know what you think about the Chicago Bulls in the comment section below. What do you think about some of those acquisitions? Were you right or wrong about them while they were happening? Also, if you want to see me produce more NBA content, you can catch me on Twitch or on my second channel, where I am much more active than on this channel because these videos take a little bit longer to produce. But until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.